Who makes sense for the Cincinnati Bengals to target in the 2025 draft out of the 2025 Senior Bowl? Let's break it down.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liscow, along with your host, James Rapien, joined today by A to Z Sports' John Sheeran, who did a sweet Senior Bowl mock draft we're going to talk through today as we talk through some of the standouts from the Senior Bowl that make sense for the Bengals throughout the first few rounds of the NFL draft. John went 5 rounds deep. Welcome back to the Everydayers. Appreciate all of you who don't miss an episode of Locked On Bengals. We will, of course, talk about Joe Burrow's comments at the Pro Bowl. We will get there. We're recording this before the flag football game that will occur on Sunday, so we'll make sure that we have any interesting mic'd up moments to talk about from that event as well. If you're new to the show, you can hit the subscribe button on YouTube or anywhere you get your podcast so you don't miss an episode of Locked On Bengals. This will have you covered throughout this offseason. Today's episode sponsored by LinkedIn Jobs, who helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. You can post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. And if the Bengals could do that for some of these draft picks they have to make, we make this joke all the time. Maybe it would help. Couldn't hurt. They need to get better in the draft. And John, you put together a list of some players that can make sense for the Bengals. You have a 5-round mock draft of all Senior Bowl players. Let's start by just tell me what your process was here. How did you identify the players that you thought made sense for the Bengals from the events in Mobile last week?
I did the one thing that I think a lot of Bengals fans wish the Bengals would do, and that's outsource. This took about an hour of just seeing, hey, who's really stood out at the Senior Bowl? Who produced in college? Who is likely to be a really good athlete? And who, despite maybe who they played in college, who looked really good against really good college players, which is what the Senior Bowl is all about, right? It's where you get to learn about these guys who, some of them obviously played a big program, some of them didn't. And maybe that's an attribute to how they were recruited or where they ended up, or whatever the case may be. The Bengals obviously really value how these guys perform on this stage. It's one of the big stepping stones towards the draft process. So seeing where these guys are currently ranked in the general consensus in the the NFL world, and seeing kind of how they did, if they made a positive impact on their draft stock this week. And that was kind of the whole process. It was a 6-round mock, though, because I believe the Bengals only have 6 picks. So there's no sense in shortening these things when typically there's 7 rounds, I guess.
My bad. It was just the lack of the final round that threw me off. It is, in fact, 6 picks.
How weird does it feel? I haven't done a mock yet, but 6 picks versus 10 last year. I think everyone's like, oh my God, they don't have any picks. And it's just a normal draft minus the 7th rounder that no one really cares about anyway. How weird was that?
It's, a little bit, because, like the 7th round is Khalil Herbert, who you don't know is going to be on this team at this moment in time. But no, you would like to think that the Bengals wouldn't need 6 picks to make the team, but that's not where the roster is at this point. So this does seem at the very early point that it's a decent class to maybe trade back and gain a couple of picks, but we're not going to operate in that great of a hypothetical on, I believe the day is February 2nd. So yeah, we're going to run with 6 picks and see what we can do.
John, you had the Bengals picking Mike Green out of Marshall with the 17th overall pick. I think a lot of people would see edge, would see pass rush, and be all in there. What did you see from him in Mobile, and what do you like? What stands out? Why would you be happy with him at 17?
I don't think there was a box that he didn't check down there. There was the Oregon tackle, Josh Connerly or someone like that, and he just embarrassed him on both sides. And that's what you want to see, because those one-on-ones between O lineman and D lineman completely favor the defensive line. Like it's more impressive when an offensive lineman wins those reps, and we can talk about someone else who kind of did that here in the coming minutes. But Mike Green, he went with power, he went with speed, he went with bend. It's what he did at Marshall. I don't know why Virginia didn't want him around, but that's where he started his college career. And once he got some playing time with Marshall, again, that kind of at a lower level program, just dominated. I think someone brought up the Khalil Mack comparison as a guy from that mid-major type of talent who maybe isn't the biggest edge rusher in the world, but you just wonder, like, how is an athlete this powerful and quick, who's already really proficient with his hands, how is he just at this level of college and wasn't highly recruited out of high school? So I think with a talk about a fit with the Bengals, he's like a 3. I don't even know how he was recruited. He definitely wasn't a 5-star, which is typically where they look at in the first round. But just produced out of his mind. He's probably going to be an elite athlete. He checks all the boxes you want for a first round pick. And I think he was probably the most dominant player in the entire Senior Bowl.
And he certainly helped himself to the point where he may or may not be available depending on what board you believe. Some boards will have him as a clear top 10 pick at this point when you combine the production profile with the athletic traits that are expected for him. The only thing with Mike Green is that he's a little bit smaller than what the Bengals would typically draft at the position. The player that fits that mold probably best out of guys that were at the Senior Bowl would be a Shamar Stewart. That would be a very Bengals-y pick, right? He also helped himself at the Senior Bowl, I think, and is the 285-pound, massive kind of defensive end mold. The problem with Shamar Stewart's profile is that he didn't produce in college. Like, he has all these traits, and he's a big guy, and he had a good Senior Bowl, so he's having a good start to his draft process. We'll see how he tests at the combine, but he didn't have the production in college. What were your thoughts? Did you consider Stewart here? Did you consider anyone else for the first round pick when you were thinking about Bengals targets?
Yeah, I think Stewart, like you said, he makes sense as a target. He was also a 5-star recruit. Zach Taylor's obviously very familiar with Texas A&M, and that's where he comes from. So I'm sure there'd be some intel that you could get there. It was just a talented defensive line, I think, at Texas A&M in general, because he also had Nick Scourton on the other edge, who's a player that I'm sure we're going to talk about in the coming weeks and months. But yeah, it's only 21 years old. And I think you have to look at age when you talk about lack of production. It's like the one area where it can be kind of excused. But when you're drafting someone in the first round, you want to avoid, with all respect to Miles Murphy, you want to make sure that you don't have the Miles Murphy type of risks for a first round pass rusher in that regard. So Shamar Stewart definitely makes sense as a traditional target. But for this exercise, I wanted to go with not only the guys that prove themselves in Mobile, but also have the most boxes checks as prospects.
For sure. Give me the production. Whatever they end up picking, I would certainly, and I hope they do. Why wouldn't you value production, even if it's at the smaller school level? Yeah, 6'3", 251. I do wonder that. And they definitely evaluate with all their guys, and not just edge prospects or trench prospects, like even receivers. They'll look at it and say, all right, well, can they handle the AFC North and the physicality that comes with it? So I think that's why they've always trended to go bigger on the edge, whether we like it or not. But we'll see maybe if having an Al Golden helps change their mold at least a little bit with what they end up targeting.
Or maybe entrenches it, because we're going from this age where the Bengals actually were a 3-4 defense or 5-2 defense or whatever you want to call it. They would often have 5-man surfaces, and Al Golden has said so far that he wants to play a 4-3 base, which means they're going to have 3 linebackers on the field. And when you have smaller backers on the field and 4 defensive linemen instead of a 5-man surface, well, you're now talking about potentially needing bigger ends for those roles, because you won't have 3 defensive tackles on the field on base downs, as we've seen from the Bengals in the Lou Anarumo era. So that could be interesting as well. The one other name, John, that I wanted to make sure we mentioned as far as Senior Bowl first round potential, Walter Nolan, Ole Miss defensive tackle, sounded like he also had himself a good week. Are you assuming that he won't be available, or what was the decision making for you when you went edge instead of Nolan here?
I think there's a wide variance with Mike Green, and it's probably the same with Walter Nolan, because on paper, probably shouldn't leave the top 15 picks, which is how I think a lot of us thought about Johnny Newton last year. I'm not going to say that Nolan has this mysterious injury that's going to drop him all the way to the second round, but our guy at A to Z Sports, Ryan Roberts, he's very well connected within the college sphere. He said that there was some questions I think Nolan has to kind of answer in the interview process, and it's the one thing that none of us can ever predict how these guys are going to interview and how the Bengals like these guys in the process. But Nolan is still a 5-star recruit who produced at not 1, but 2 SEC programs. All the production profile that you could ever ask for looks like the part as far as athleticism ends up on the ground a little bit. I think too much for some people to prefer, but still, if you're talking about a 17th overall pick, you're not going to get a perfect prospect. Amarius Mims wasn't perfect, but he was still someone that you would have taken that risk at with the 18th overall pick. So definitely worth it, in my opinion, as of now. But he's still someone that I think we're just going to have to learn a little bit more in the coming weeks, and I'm sure more will kind of come out about him in that regard.
He played for 2 SEC schools, huh?
Yeah, he was at Texas A&M, I think, first.
Anyways, that's a Jermaine Burton reference, and I probably shouldn't have made it. Up next, we'll continue with plenty of NFL draft conversation with John. Today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn. If you're looking to make the right hire for your small business, well, you got to get to LinkedIn, because as a small business owner, the day doesn't end when the clock hits 5 o'clock. You're always on the clock. And that's why you want to find reliable employees. You also don't want to waste time. You want to maximize your time and find the right hires, the qualified hires. And that's where LinkedIn comes in, because you can post your job with LinkedIn's new feature that can help you write descriptions and quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip: add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture to double your reach to qualified candidates. No wonder 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high quality hires. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
Let's move on to day 2 in the mock. John, you've got another smaller school, going back to a school that Bengals fans may be familiar with, that closely track the NFL draft. Certainly Locked On Bengals listeners know where Cordell Volson went to school, and so did Gray Zabel. Tell me about Gray Zabel. Tell me about the week he had before we talk about some of the alternatives you may have considered here in the second round.
I think when you're talking about someone the Bengals would appreciate, a guy coming from that smaller level of competition to then playing all 3 interior offensive line positions and dominating in each one. Like, again, the individual drills for offensive and defensive linemen, it greatly favors the defensive linemen. So when you have an offensive lineman who's stonewalling dudes at right guard, center, and left guard from much bigger schools, that's what Gray Zabel did. He did it all week, and I think everyone kind of noticed that, and that's why people are now considering him the top center prospect in this class, someone who has an argument, I think, to be made to be drafted in the first round. We'll see if that ends up happening, but I think the comparison with Cordell Volson is completely unfounded, because not only are they 2 different types of players, they're 2 different types of athletes. I think Zabel doesn't have the length that Volson has. He doesn't have quite the height. So I think he's well more suited to win leverage battles, especially in the situations where Volson has struggled in his 3 years with the Bengals. But that might be the one thing that kind of keeps him off the Bengals radar. I think Scott Peters is someone who maybe not so quietly does prefer arm length in his prospects, and Zabel only has, I think, 32.25-inch arms, which makes sense as to why he's being pegged as a center. And obviously the Bengals probably wouldn't play him at center anyways, because they have their guy of the future there, Matt Lee. But just someone, if you're looking at a guy who could be a plug and play guy at left guard to compete with Volson at the Senior Bowl, he was probably one of the better options to take there in the second round.
Yeah, I do wonder how I guess this is going to be the size podcast, but how they would view it, because historically, like, you just look back a few years ago, Tyler Linderbaum, they were just out on him. Like, they were not going to pick Tyler Linderbaum. And obviously I hate that because it would have been good had he made it there to them in the 2022 draft. And so how do they view it? I don't think that they would want a center only, like you said, and not really just because of Matt Lee, but just because of the need at guard. So if they think he can play guard, then I like it. And I would love versatility. I would love a guy that you feel like can play guard and center. And I'm not sure that they feel that way. I'm pretty confident they don't feel that way about Matt Lee.
And Zabel was a guy that played tackle, and is thought that his best NFL position is center. He did play all over the place in Mobile. He was pretty good all over the place. It sounded like his last practice wasn't quite as strong as his first couple when he made a really strong impression. But like we've talked about, when you look at these one-on-ones, typically these favor the defensive lineman, and you see the stuff like Mike Green running through somebody's face, and you don't see, well, you do if you're really paying attention, but you don't see as often the offensive lineman winning these one-on-ones. And Gray Zabel won quite a few of his one-on-one opportunities going against major talent in the way of bigger schools that North Dakota State doesn't have the opportunity to play every year. So there is a North Dakota State thing, but North Dakota State seems like every year or few years has a lineman headed to the NFL, has a tight end headed to the NFL. The top of its division in college football, just it's not the Big Ten or the SEC or whatever the major conferences are in college football at this point. Was there anyone else, John, that caught your eye for second round potential fit for the Bengals out of Mobile?
Obviously the two edges, Princely from Ole Miss and Donovan from Boston College. Like if they didn't go edge in round one, I think those are two very strong candidates for round two. I think both of them may have some minor flaws in their profiles in regards to their fit with the Bengals. But obviously, if you're taking Mike Green in round one, you're probably not double dipping at edge, even though maybe they wouldn't be the worst strategy considering the fate and the situation at that position group. But no, there's Jonah from Arizona. I can't pronounce his last name at the moment, but he's also, I think that fits more of like, because like what James was talking about, like I don't know if they would want a guard who can also play center. They would probably want a guard who could also play tackle. I feel like for their guards, they want the outside versatility, and I think arm length definitely factors in there. And Jonah, last name redacted, definitely fits that mold.
I like that. Last name redacted. Third round is weapon time, and I love it. You have them taking Mason Taylor out of LSU, the tight end, and I think this is important almost as a PSA for Bengals fans, because I think that there's a high likelihood that they take a tight end, maybe it's on day one, day two, but certainly after the Eric All injury, given how good this draft class could be at tight end, I would expect them to take one. You have them taking Taylor. What stands out?
This was funny to me because when the week started, I'm like, this tight end class doesn't look that promising. I don't know, aside from Tyler Warren, if there's like a star here. Like Harold Fannin Jr. is obviously someone that some people knew because of how productive he was. But Mason Taylor wasn't on my radar at all because he wasn't that productive at LSU. I think he has the box score stats that are kind of decent to look at, but he wasn't that involved in the offense from a grand scheme of things. But still, just 20, 21 years old, a true third-year player. And now those types of guys can go to the Senior Bowl and kind of show off. And that's what he did. And I don't think there was anything that he did poorly. I think he was kind of showed that he's a jack of all trades. He can inline block, he can take on guys in one-on-one situations, and he can win as a route runner in one-on-one situations. And I think he's got some of the best hands out of this entire tight end class. So I think the third round is where you would typically take a flyer on guys who weren't as productive but have the kind of the surprising athleticism upside, who are also very young and also come from a solid program. And you're right, James. Like, I mean, this team just needs tight end talent at the end of the day, and it's not an ideal situation that they're in. And I think there's still a lot more that we need to learn about this tight end class, because I think there's a lot of guys like Elijah Arroyo, who also has some production questions, but who are very interesting prospects that you would consider in those middle rounds. And at least with Mason Taylor, I think you can confidently say he's a quality football player who can do a lot of things.
I think if they could find the next Eric All without the injury history, they would jump at it in round 3, just to give people an idea of. So the one-on-one route running, like you said, willing blocker that's capable, I think they would for sure be in. At least some key people in that building would want them to go that route, put it that way.
My takeaway on Mason Taylor was this is one of the players that I actually watched before the Senior Bowl, and it sent me back to the tape, because on tape you don't see the separation nearly as consistently, at least in the game I watched. And it was actually only one game. So in that game, my impression was such that, like, I don't really need to see this guy anymore. And then he goes down to Mobile and was much more impressive. And it might have just been that game, because I think we talked about Daniel Jeremiah had him in the top 50 of his board, and was also talking about Mason Taylor and Elijah Arroyo when he's talking about the winners from the Senior Bowl. So a couple of tight ends really stood out there. And you talk about went to a good program, comes from a good program, also comes from great NFL bloodlines. And I wonder how being the son of Jason Taylor, and then he literally changed the first letter of his son's name to Mason instead of Jason, is going to impact Taylor's draft stock, because people know who Jason Taylor is in the NFL circles. Like, people that are drafting are going to hear from Jason Taylor and be like, hey, tell me about your kid, and those bloodlines can make an impact sometimes on where players get picked. And like you said, one of the best things about his profile is that he's young. He's going to be around 21 at the time of the draft. And when you can get a young tight end, some of those concerns about the movement ability and athleticism and stuff, you can see that improve over time at that position. Tight end, certainly a developmental position. We got to get to day 3, though, here. We'll finish up with day 3 of John's Senior Bowl mock draft to finish the show coming up next. The big game's almost here. And if you're looking for a way to make it exciting because you're a Bengals fan and you're not very excited about the teams in it, well, PrizePicks, the best place for daily fantasy sports, is there for you. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings rewarded, PrizePicks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. All you have to do is pick more or less on at least 2 player projections. And if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. PrizePicks even has a free pick for the big game where Patrick Mahomes only needs to throw for 1 yard for you to win that pick. Pair that with 1 more correct pick and you're cashing out. You can download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL. You'll get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly when you play your first lineup at PrizePicks. Run your game.
Today's show is also brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is the app you need right now because it's going to help you get into the live events you want to go to, whether it's the big game, like Jake mentioned, whether it's watching Luka Doncic in a Lakers uniform. Yeah, Luka is a Laker, and whether you're a fan of that or not, or maybe you're looking ahead to some concerts this summer, Gametime is going to make it so much simpler, so much easier, and take the guesswork out of buying tickets to your favorite events. Right now with the Gametime app, they have a new feature called Gametime Picks, and it's going to cut out all of the fluff and show you the great deals. You're not going to have to search through hundreds of tickets to find the right tickets. Gametime Picks will help you do that. So make things so much easier as you try to get to these live events and go to these live events by downloading the Gametime app, creating an account, and using code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
Let's get to that day 3 of your mock draft, John, and another small school. What are we doing here? Just small school draft. Tell me about your 4th round selection for the Bengals.
Darius Alexander might have been the winner of the week. Maybe that's exaggeration, but there was a lot of hype about him after this. I think the Chris Jones comparison is going a little bit too far, but that was something that Daniel Jeremiah kind of floated out there, and I think I saw someone else do the same thing. But when someone who's 6'4", 305 pounds wins with his hands and his acceleration and his get off, as well as Darius Alexander did, not just from the defensive tackle spot, but from the edge, I think from both edge spots, like, it's noticeable, right? Because again, it's someone who didn't go up against like the biggest recruits and the best players in college, but you're doing this now in this environment, and you're kind of taking notice about your versatility and putting your athleticism on display. Another guy that I think has production questions, though, at Toledo, as far as when he has a pass rusher, I don't think that's up for debate. His pass rush win rate was pretty damn high there against MAC level competition. As far as everything else with his production, I think it's a little bit that's left to be desired. But again, someone who clearly is a really, really, really good athlete at that size who can win like that's notable. And I think that's where you have to take these risks sometimes in the mid rounds with guys who may not come from the blue blood programs, because these are the guys that end up surprising you in the NFL down the road.
How was the general response of defensive tackle in round 4? Not earlier. Obviously, you've gone three trench picks and 4 picks over the first 4 picks. But what was the overall response there from fans?
Well, the overall response is that this mock is great, which is like, the Bengals spend months, if not a full year, preparing for drafts, and they get mixed responses at best. So all you need to do is just put together a mock in like an hour, and like, everyone will love you because you just listen to everyone else and all their evaluations, right? But no, the Bengals, I don't really know. I don't know how aggressive they're going to be in drafting a defensive tackle because of how they do it in free agency. Obviously, they're going to sign a starter, at least one, in free agency, and I think they still want to give Chris Jenkins and McKinley Jackson a fair shot at competing next year. So how early a rookie kind of goes into the equation, I think, is something that we should probably be talking about. And obviously, we're going to get a better indication of what that plan is after free agency. But it's not a group where you can have 6 or 7 guys there. Like only 5 at most will make the team.
Yeah, and it's hard to figure out how they will go about it in free agency right now. It is a strength in this draft. It appears to be, at least, especially relative to last year when there was like nobody. And I'm excited right now about another Senior Bowl standout to me, John Marie Caldwell, Oregon nose tackle who played next to Derek Harmon, who had like some freaky bursts for a man who's 340 pounds. And you go watch him in Oregon and he's holding up against double teams as well. That's a player that I would certainly be interested in for the Bengals on day 3 as well. There are a number of other guys that you could consider at this point, though, when you start to get to day 3. I can't say his name, Peebles, Virginia Tech, undersized defensive tackle with pass rush juice if they wanted to go that direction. But typically not a player for the size profile that they'll draft. And I think that the size issue is going to come up quite often with a number of interesting players from the Senior Bowl and throughout the draft, where the question will be, with the new defensive staff, do the size preferences endure, or do those change at all? And so I think that will come up quite a lot. But we don't have a whole lot in the way of weapons so far here, John. We got a tight end. Was there anyone else you're considering in the 4th round? Any other standouts that you think are 4th round eligible before we get to your 5th round pick?
I think a linebacker is definitely in the consideration for this class. Jeffrey Bassa from Oregon was someone I think who was commended for his leadership ability, specifically down there in the Senior Bowl. You just look at obviously what Al Golden was able to do last time in drafting both Logan Wilson and King Davis Gaither from this event, as far as potentially kind of doing a soft rebuild of that position group. If Jermaine Pratt is no longer here, I don't think it can be taken off the table at all if a linebacker is taken somewhere in between like rounds 3 and 5.
Especially if they need to add 2, because they want to put 3 linebackers on the field often. James, go ahead.
I like that you're going with a 5th round running back. It worked with Chase Brown. Why not work again? You got the NFL bloodlines as well with Trevor Etienne. What went into this, and why do you think he would be a good fit? I agree with you, by the way, but why do you think he'd be a good fit here?
It's another interesting position because I think a lot of fans wouldn't mind like a Trayvon Henderson in round 3, but how early are the Bengals going to take a running back, right? Considering
Henderson's there in round 3. Whoo.
Yeah, like it's something worth talking about. But I think with Etienne, he was excelled really well as a receiver in those drills this week, and I think that's something that they're obviously always going to value. Just because, like, I mean, like when you're talking about replacing Zach Moss, like what are the traits that you're looking for? How do you want to make sure that Chase Brown doesn't get completely just tired out throughout the season, right? You want to be able to make sure that if Chase Brown is off the field, you can still operate in the passing game in a good manner. And I think Etienne even had some pretty decent moments as a pass blocker as well. So that's only going to help him out. And obviously, like you said, he's got a brother who's a pretty decent NFL player. And I think that it's going to help him out as well. But yeah, he was someone that I think was even still in the consensus, like 6th and 7th round range. And I feel like he's going to get taken a little bit higher than that. But as far as this regime, though, and this team, I don't think the Bengals are that team that will target a 2nd round running back anymore. I think they're pretty firmly in day 3 is where you find the value at this position. And if a guy like Etienne is there, I think they would consider him.
I think it would depend on the player. I think if there was somebody that they fell in love with, like a Jameer Gibbs, for example.
Oh, do it to me. I knew you were going to bring him up. Oh,
well, I mean, we know that it's a player the Bengals liked and would have strongly considered. So I don't think that it's like never, but I think it's a specific type of player that they would consider at this point. Like the receiving ability was a big factor there with Jameer Gibbs. And so I like that you're mentioning receiving ability here with Trevor Etienne as well. And we finally get a player that Al Golden is very familiar with here to wrap it up, because he didn't play in the Senior Bowl. We don't get to talk about Xavier Watts today, which is shocking to me because I thought we were going to be talking about Xavier Watts in every single mock draft discussion that we had on Locked On Bengals between now and April. We're not doing that today, but a different Notre Dame player here, John.
Yeah, Jack Kaiser finally get a linebacker, and I considered one of the defensive linemen that I think were also down there for Notre Dame at the Senior Bowl. But with Kaiser, 24 years old, was really obviously a focal point in what Golden liked to do at the position. He well versed in his blitz schemes and just rushing the passer around on some of those downs. And I think the biggest question is going to be how he fares in coverage. I think he had some good moments down there against this competition, but against NFL players, we're talking about someone who's kind of a grown man without grown man speed necessarily. So obviously, if there's any defensive coordinator that you would trust to utilize Jack Kaiser, if you had to play him for significant snaps, you would trust Al Golden out of all those guys because he's well familiar with him. But someone who's a sure tackler, and I think at time his blitzes pretty well, and obviously knows where to be. So that's all. Like, it's just what a 6th-round pick is. At the end of the day, he's not going to have that great of athletic upside. Sometimes you end up finding those guys like a Yoshi here and there, but someone that Golden's obviously very familiar with and could just fill out the back half of that linebacker room.
Riley Mills, Howard Cross, and R.J. Oben, the other Notre Dame defensive linemen that are going to be in this draft that we might hear about at some point.
My favorite part, John, of this mock is you clearly have the Bengals keeping their trio. So in my head, they made these picks after signing Jamar T and Trey Hendricks into long-term deals. So that's a pretty good offseason, I would say.
I don't know. There's still time for Jamar Chase to be a Laker. We just don't know.
Oh, that's a great note to end it on. You can find John on social media on Twitter at John__. That's 2 underscores. Sheeran. You can find his work at A to Z Sports, where he does a great job of covering the Bengals. John, appreciate the time. And that's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Until next time, thanks for listening. Hoo day, and have a good one.